things are heating up rather quickly in Iran. Trita Parsi says the following: Iran's patience has run out. A year after Trump quit the Iran deal and began punishing Iran for adhering to the agreement, Tehran has now announced reciprocal steps it will take to reduce its collaboration, potentially even starting 20% enrichment. It's getting serious. So I just need everybody to understand, the order of events here. Because Iran, as verified by the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, they repeatedly followed the agreement to the letter. So they allowed in inspectors nonstop. They only enriched to a certain level for research and for power for their power grid. And the United States, in response to that, the Trump administration spit in their eye and pulled out of the deal. Now, that had devastating effects on the Iranian economy. We also threw sanctions back on them, massively increased sanctions, which is a violation of the agreement. That's a violation of the agreement, and we did it. We did it. And Europe was trying to abide by the agreement, but, the U.S. is strangling the economy. They're trying to force their oil exports to zero, which would really be the total collapse and implosion of the economy. And the whole idea is, let's try to force regime change. And they finally had enough, and now basically what they're saying is, our patience is just gone now because we've been nothing but patient, and you guys kept violating the deal. You guys pulled out of the deal. And now, okay, fine, we'll start enriching even to 20%. And I can't wait for now the media in the U.S. and the government in the U.S. to say, oh, how could you do such a thing? And what do you mean, how could they do such a thing? You put sanctions on goods, including medicine. There were stories about how people were dying because they didn't have access to the medicine that they needed. So what do you mean, how could they do it? You made them do it. That's obvious. If you just stayed in the agreement and followed the agreement, everything would be hunky-dory now. And it's also hilarious that at the same time, Trump and his administration have ripped up this agreement. They're basically pursuing the same kind of an agreement with North Korea. What? That's the exact framework of the Iran deal that Trump pulled up is the exact framework of an agreement that he's actively pursuing with North Korea. So there is no consistency. There is no logic. There is no method to the madness. No. In 90 to 95% of the foreign policy issues, Donald Trump is just abiding by the wishes and the orders of his merry band of neocon bloodthirsty idiots. People like John Bolton, people like Mike Pompeo. So Iran has finally said, all right, fine, fuck you. Fuck you. And I think what this is, guys, this is a move, again, to try to be a deterrent to literal regime change. They see what the U.S. is doing in Venezuela right this second. They see what Trump has been doing around the world with, again, on 90 to 95% of foreign policy issues. He's escalating. He's being more hawkish, more interventionist. So the Iranian regime, this is self-preservation mode. And self-preservation mode is what? Okay, we're developing the weapons. We're developing the weapons. So you want to make a move on us? We're developing the weapons, dude. We can deter you. We have the ability to counterstrike. So I'm just letting you know. And by the way, that was the same logic originally for North Korea. Everybody always flips out. North Korea is doing missile tests. Ooh. That was them scared shitless that the U.S. government is going to try to topple them. So that's them saying, we can fight back. So please don't topple us. It's always hilarious how in U.S. media, everything is portrayed that we do as, by definition, defensive, even though all the evidence is in the opposite direction. So, and check out this next tweet. This is just as important. Barbara Starr of CNN says the following. U.S. officials tell me the threats from Iran include specific and credible intelligence that Iranian forces and proxies were targeting U.S. forces in Syria, Iraq, and at sea. There were multiple threats of intelligence. There were multiple threads of intelligence about multiple locations, the officials said. oh no, here we go. Now, were any specifics given? No. CNN reported this. Also, Axios reported this. Same vague bullshit. Where the reporters go, I spoke to somebody who is in our government and in the Pentagon and is in the CIA, and these folks are telling me that Iran is about to offensively strike us in Iraq, Syria, and on the sea. It looks like they are going to attack us. So, we should probably do something in response, shouldn't we? No evidence, no data, no details. The media, Barbara Starr at CNN and the reporter at Axios, they are being stenographers to power. As if the Pentagon and the CIA have never had an agenda and never driven the ship and never decided, let's try to build a case to attack them. Even though we're going on the offense, we have to portray it as being defensive so that people are cool with it. Shame on these so-called reporters, man, because how many times has this happened? How many times have we been misled into illegal and offensive wars? It's happened time and time and time again since World War II. So, but you don't need to take my word for it. We have literal quotes here from the Trump administration, and it was spliced by MoveOn back-to-back with comments from the build-up to regime change in Iraq, the build-up to the war in Iraq. Take a look at this.
And we know that Iraq is continuing to finance terror and gives assistance to groups that use terrorism to undermine Middle East peace.
The Iranian regime continues to fuel conflict, terror, and turmoil throughout the Middle East and beyond.
Many nations are joining us in insisting that Saddam Hussein's regime be held accountable.
Iran will be held accountable.
The danger is already significant, and it only grows worse with time.
This is a threat to the region and a threat to the world, and it gets worse day by day by day.
The same tyrant has tried to dominate the Middle East.
And Iran's ambition to dominate the Middle East remains.
They could attack our allies or attempt to blackmail the United States.
America will not be held hostage to nuclear blackmail.
Regime change in Iraq is the only certain means of removing a great danger to our nation.
And therefore, the only solution is to change the regime itself.
Because I really do believe we will be greeted as liberators.
Freedom is right around the corner.
I mean, it's the same script. It's the same goddamn script. They're trying to build a case and pretend like it's defensive. They were targeting us, maybe not, with zero evidence and no places and no information. They were targeting us, and we must maybe strike back. It's the same script. It's a different decade, and our media is going right along with it. Mainstream media, corporate media is going right along with it. Notice, we just covered the story last week. There were 0 anti-regime change voices allowed in the conversation in mainstream media on the issue of Venezuela. 0 anti-regime change voices. You're telling me they're not doing propaganda? Listen, this all goes back to Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent. If you haven't read that book, read that book. He makes the case that corporate media functions oftentimes as a bigger servant of the state than literal state media does in other respective states. So, because the argument is, oh, wow, that's RTs, that's funded by the Russian government. They're obviously puppets of the Russian government. Whereas corporate media actually reflects the interests of the CIA and the Pentagon and our government more than even state media reflects other respective states' agendas. And he, obviously he makes an ironclad case for that argument, but when you see that 0% of the voices on Venezuela were anti-regime change, what other explanation is there other than there are multiple levels of filtration where only certain voices are allowed on, and those voices are going to more or less toe the line, and they're going to limit the Overton window to a spectrum where the furthest right-wing position involves boots on the ground, let's take them out and do an all-out war. And then the furthest left-wing position is, let's use soft power. So let's back rebel groups to do the dirty work for us. Let's, back a regime change coup led by others, and we'll give outside support, we'll give intelligence support. So that's the Overton window, that's the spectrum of debate, but all is agreed that regime change is awesome and the right thing to do, and we are correct for doing it. And the premise of the entire conversation is we're allowed to do whatever we want. The U.S. government, we don't need to follow international law. We get to override international law because we mean well by definition, because we're the good guys by definition. So they don't allow actual debate on the issue. The spectrum of debate is way off to that right end of the spectrum. And this is exactly what we're seeing now with Iran. Go ahead, turn on CNN. Go ahead, turn on MSNBC. Are you kidding me? We just did the thing with Rachel Maddow in Venezuela, siding with John Bolton. She's now pro-war in Venezuela because Donald Trump must stand up to Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin nominally wants the U.S. out of Venezuela, so now I want the U.S. in Venezuela. This is deranged, man. This is deranged. We're at the point where the loudest voices in our society and the majority of the media apparatus, they're not focused on the issues, and they're not focused on what's best for the American people, and they're not focused on truth-telling. And that's how you get a wag-the-dog-like situation that we're in right now. Listen, hands off Venezuela, hands off Iran. What we're doing is illegal. What we're doing is offensive. What we're doing is genuinely destabilizing. Blowing up the world yet again at the behest of the military-industrial complex and the corporatocracy. And you might say, hey, Kyle, that's conspiratorial. You're getting Alex Jones territory. Don't take my word for it, dog. John Bolton said it himself on Fox Business about a month and a half ago or 2 months ago. He said, yeah, it would be great if we get our hands on that Venezuelan oil. Venezuela has like the largest oil reserves in the world. And Bolton just came out and said it on Fox Business because he's among friends on Fox Business Network, and usually it's just rich executives watching Fox Business. And he said, yeah, it'd be great for U.S. capital, for Western capital, if we get our hands on that oil. So what do you think's going on in Iran, too? It's a government that's hostile to U.S. interests, and we want geopolitical control of that very vital and important region in the world. And just like when we overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh, and we put the Shah into power in 1953, the West wanted cheap oil. It was the U.S. and the U.K., and the Shah gave the West super cheap oil. When Mohammad Mossadegh, his whole thing was, I'm going to nationalize the oil and give the money to the Iranian people. And that's when we said, okay, well, we're going to topple your fucking ass because we ain't going to let that happen. And then, of course, the overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh and the installation of the Shah inevitably led to the 1979 Islamic Revolution. So because of Western influence, there was a far-right uprising, and that led to the Islamic Revolution and the current theocratic government that we have to this day. And now we're trying to overthrow that government. Here's a radical idea. How about we have no right to do any of that stuff because Iran is not about to attack Nebraska? How about, there is no radical Venezuelan terrorism that's about to invade the beaches of Florida, so we can't do shit when it comes to Venezuela either. How about our country's crumbling, our infrastructure gets a grade of D+, places like Flint, Michigan still don't have clean water, and we should take care of our own goddamn business before we pretend like we're the policemen of the world and we go everywhere around the world and we try to topple governments and control everything. How about we back 73% of the world's dictatorships? So when our government argues, we got to stop Iran because they're a dictatorship, we got to stop Maduro because he's a dictator. How about that argument rings incredibly hollow because we just gave a $100 billion weapons deal to fucking the Saudi Arabian government, and they're one of the worst authoritarian dictatorships on the planet, also a theocracy. So it's sickening, man. It's sickening.